Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the Identity Project. Today, I have a very special guest, somebody that has been oh so popular lately. You've probably heard her on all the podcasts over the last few months here, but Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. I appreciate you taking the time today to come on the show. How are you? Where are you located? Where are you at?
I'm about 30 minutes north of Atlanta. If people aren't, if people are in the country, but it's in Georgia, so we're sort of in the southeastern corner of the United States, sort of like in the sweaty Florida. It's down here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually have a client down there. She's like a like a personal chef,
Ooh.
and but she's very into the whole kind of like Atlanta like rap culture that's down there, which is definitely pretty cool. So that's awesome. Are you like from there, born and raised, or?
No, I actually, I was born in Germany. My dad is military, retired Air Force. So I lived there for 3.5 years and then grew up in Michigan for the most part until I was 18 and then moved down to Virginia. And I spent about 10 years in Virginia. That's where I went to undergrad and grad. I moved to Georgia actually just about 4.5 years ago for my professorship.
Got it. Got it. Very cool. Well, on that note, as we were kind of chatting before this, I would love to kind of really just like learn more about your journey. You're doing a lot of different things now, and we'll kind of dive into that later. But I would love to just kind of hear like, how did you get into this whole crazy nutrition fitness space?
Yeah, it's so funny because I actually was never athletically inclined, grow up knowing anything about nutrition. Um, my mom was not, like into that lifestyle in any way, shape, or form. And really, I grew up kind of eating the kind standard American diet. Like I remember we ate a lot of microwave chicken pot pies and things like that. And part of it was really due to socioeconomic. So I was, living in a single household, and times were tough pretty often. So I ended up moving in with my dad and my stepmom when I was a little bit older, and switched school districts and sort of, um, became a little more cognizant of eating vegetables at every meal and things like that, a lot more home cooked food. But I really didn't get into the nutrition and fitness lifestyle until I went away to college. I actually started as a music therapy major because music was a huge part of my life. I competed at the national level in choir and things like that. And but as it turned out, I really wasn't passionate about like music theory and learning other instruments. And I was really passionate about biology. But I had grown up, for the first 13 years of my life being told that the women in our family are not strong in math or science. And so, I wouldn't be either. And so I had this sort of ingrained thought pattern of, oh, this is going to be really hard. I'm not going to be good at this. And as it turns out, I actually excelled in biology. And my journey into fitness started way that a lot of people I think initially get into it, which is that I wanted to lose weight. I didn't want to gain the freshman 15, and even before that, I had to lose weight to fit into my prom dress. But I did ridiculous stuff like I would get the chicken salad at lunch and like peel all the breading off of the chicken tenders because cut carbs. And I started in my freshman year of college. I was doing, this is 13 years ago. I was doing keto, high protein, intermittent fasting, just everything that I possibly could. I didn't really know what I should be doing, and so I ended up unfortunately developing disordered eating, and I just didn't realize that I was at such great risk of developing that because I had grown up in a very kind of stoic household, and I had like a lot of grit, and I was really good at toughing things out. But I think that happens to quite a few people who sort of start out, trying to diet, and then it turns into perhaps they end up on the spectrum of disordered eating or develop a full-blown eating disorder, and don't really realize it until it really catches up with them. But there are a lot of positives out of it in that I started to lift regularly, and that's still a huge part of my life. I switched my major to exercise science, and then I was able to educate myself much more about, the things that I should be doing. But it was a double-edged sword because I also felt, kind of embarrassed and shameful about having developed disordered eating later on when I was diagnosed, because I thought, gosh, I should really know better. I'm in the field. And it's, I think it speaks to the fact that it's not a deficit of knowledge when that develops. It is, a manifestation of other things that are going on, and it's really a psychological thing. So that was sort of a long and convoluted story, but it had, I've had an interesting journey to get into this lifestyle, and fortunately, treatment for all of that, and I'm in a really positive place now, and feel confident, that I can help other people find that same balance.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, first off, I just love hearing people's stories, even like whether it's like surface level or if we dive super, super deep. And like, I'm just always amazed by like hearing people's journey. I mean, because if I would have looked you up on Instagram like I would have never known that. You know what I mean? It's like I guess Instagram, like we put up like this perfect picture, or a lot of people put up this perfect picture, and it's just always a great reminder. That's why I love the platform of podcasting, because you're able to learn more about these people. They ultimately can essentially become like a mentor from afar, in this information age that we live in. So that's awesome. That's really cool. So thanks for sharing kind of your story and how you got to here. One conversation that I really, really am interested to dive into today is this sexy topic of gut health, if you will. How did you kind of, I guess, sculpt yourself or shape yourself into kind of this like gut health like expert?
It's so funny. I don't like, I am hesitant to say that about myself. And I think that there are other people in the field too who are kind of like, oh, I don't like to say that I'm like an expert, because, I don't want to say like I'm not humble enough to know that there are things I don't know. And also there are so many self-proclaimed experts that like don't actually know what they're talking about. But it was really a serendipitous event in that when I was in grad school, I was studying skeletal muscle physiology and biochem, and my initial project was looking at cachexia, or muscle wasting associated with high-fat feeding. And unfortunately, those samples were sort of ruined, and so my side project, looking at the potential protective effects of probiotics during high-fat feeding, that then became my main project. And we were really venturing out into sort of uncharted territory. And my advisor was really wonderful and supportive of my curiosity, because we had, in the lab, we were looking at the effects of a specific compound from certain bacteria called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. And when this binds to specific receptors of the immune system, it causes an inflammatory response. So we were using this in mice to induce this inflammatory response and determine whether that was worsened by high-fat feeding and obesity. And I wanted to know like why we were using this and where it was coming from, and then come to find out it's from the gut. Well, I really want to get to the root cause here. And so when the opportunity presented itself, to receive funding to do this probiotics research, he brought it up to me, and I was absolutely, on board with that. So that then became my main focus, and that's what I wrote my dissertation on. And that was, back in 2014, and it was at the initial phases of when kind of gut health started to get really, really popular. And now it's absolutely blown up, and people are realizing much more that it's even beyond human metabolism, but can maybe perhaps affect mood and immune function and so many different facets of human health. But I didn't really do anything with that after grad school. I was offered a position before I actually even defended, which was really incredible. And so that's when I moved down to Georgia to work as an assistant professor of exercise science for 4 years. While doing that, I did want to pursue a sport nutrition certification. And so I joined the ISSN, International Society of Sport Nutrition, and was very active on their Facebook page, as I was studying for the exam. And I decided that I wanted to also pursue coaching and consulting because I was really passionate about educating. And unfortunately, in the higher ed system, sometimes people don't reciprocate that passion. Like when you're working with students who are there sort of out of obligation, it's harder to connect with them. And the whole reason that I went into education was because I fell in love with that connection and that dynamic that occurs when you help someone meet their goals. And in undergrad for me, that was when I was tutoring. So I was like, I need to be an educator. So as it happened, Dr. Mike Israetel saw some of what I was putting out on the Facebook page. And at that point, I had a website and I had a little blog going. I mean, I really didn't have any following whatsoever. I didn't have clients or anything at that point. I'd done a couple seminars, but he reached out to me about coaching with our Renaissance Periodization. And it's so incredible that happened. A few months prior to that, I had been looking at, their website. I'd seen some things on Facebook about Renaissance Periodization and how they were going to Australia to do some seminars. And I turned to one of my friends and I was like, man, I want that to be my life. I want to be able to travel and give these seminars. And here I am, a couple years later, gonna go to Australia and give seminars. But yeah, so he reached out to me and I was 100% with that. Like it was a dream come true. And so I worked as an assistant professor while coaching for a year. And I wasn't sure, how I was going to be able to devote myself to both things. But after some time, I realized that the most fulfilling thing to me and that I couldn't do both to the ability. And so I was going to make a decision to then leave academia. So that once I had the financial stability to do so, which took a lot of, the whole year I saved. I didn't really have much of a social life. I worked a whole lot. I mean, when people talk about work-life balance, like that really didn't exist. Sometimes it's going to be like a 90-10 split, and then I was able to resign and move into coaching full time. And, gut health has become such an important topic, and one that is just rife with inaccuracies in some cases and confusion and controversy. And so we thought that I was in a good place to sort of leverage my voice to be an evidence-based practitioner, and RP coach, and as people like to say, gut health expert. I kind of want to reclaim, maybe I'll say like inner ecosystem enthusiast or something. But louder voices who are a little pragmatic, I think. And also to be, a female representative in the field, because unfortunately, even though there are really incredible practitioners, it just seems that sometimes the representation in terms of, speaking engagements and things like that, is, the representation of how many are in the field isn't really there in terms of who. So that was another long story about.
Wow. No, it's amazing. I mean, it's so inspiring, honestly. I mean, thinking back and reflecting, I mean, to when you were, 15, 16 years old, like, would you ever in a million years think that you were where you are today?
Oh my gosh, no. If you told me then, like, oh yeah, you're going to be a PhD in a field related to science, I would have been like, no, I can't do science. No, I can like write and I'll sing and maybe I'll be a famous opera singer or something like that. And, I had early dreams of being a veterinarian, but then when I worked at a kennel and I saw all the, potential gore and things that could happen, I was like, nope, that's not going to be it either.
Man, that's so interesting to me, going back to what you mentioned earlier in terms of like being told that you weren't, or you didn't have the capacity to excel at math and science. And then here you are, with a PhD and a science related field. Like, So, I mean, why was that? Like, why was that said? You know, like, have y'all had that conversation with your parents now? Like,
It was, now my dad is completely different. Like my dad is the type of person, he doesn't talk about, things being ingrained. This is just, this, you're just bad at this because the people in our family are bad at this. It was, you can do this. You are capable. It just might take a lot of work and a lot of time. And so for him, it was always about putting in the effort. And sometimes people have to put in more effort than others, I mean, and that's just the reality of it, is that our opportunities will certainly differ. People in different socioeconomic brackets will have different opportunities. And so the idea, of things being like fair, I mean, it's really not. And things are not necessarily equitable. And so, yeah, in some cases you're going to be at a disadvantage. And, typically speaking, being a female, having grown up, for 13 years in a single parent household, even though my dad was very involved with my life, it was hard for him because he lived far away. And I wasn't in a great environment at home with my biological mother. And she, didn't have, she never went to college, and told for so many years, like, that you're just bad at this. You just are not going to understand it. I think that was just something that she, that was a narrative that she had for herself as well. Um, and I have seen that too with students. When I used to teach, I would have students that would say, like, I'm just bad at this. They thought that it was something ingrained, something about their personality or their character that made them not good at, whatever subject it was. And I think that just can create sort of a learned helplessness. So you think that you're not going to be good at it, and so you perhaps don't put forth the effort. Or you go in with so much anxiety that alone really hampers your ability to concentrate and think through the problems. So when I went, when I switched households, that narrative changed a lot. And I remember I was taking in 8th grade, and I would stay after class and stay after school all the time to work with the teacher there, because my dad was like, you can do this, you just have to spend extra time with it. And I ended up getting an A in that class, and that proved to me, I can do these things. It just takes effort, it just takes time, and it takes hard work. And just like when we're talking about, being or dieting and physique competitions, anything, like, there are going to be times when it's really, really challenging and it really sucks. That doesn't mean it's not working. Sometimes that means that it is working, Right now, like, I'm far busier and have so much more on my plate than I did really when I was in academia. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that I'm not doing this right. I think it's actually a really good sign. Like Mike told me, he goes, this is, like, he was kind of joking, like, oh, well, if you weren't, like, good at what you did, you wouldn't have this problem. So, but yeah, it's unfortunate that people are brought up with that narrative that, I was bad, you're probably going to be bad at this. And then I really saw that play out in classes, and especially with females, especially in STEM fields, that we just go in thinking, like, oh, I'm probably not going to be good at this.
yeah, no, I completely agree. It's just so cool that, your dad was there and he was that influence that, I mean, really, it sounds like shaped you, as a person today too. I mean, being so driven and, like, like having that same mentality. Like, I mean, like, you look at, I interview a lot of, like, entrepreneurs on the show, and, like, it's that mindset, right? Like, there's a lot of similarities across the board. But yeah, it's just cool. I mean, hearing your story of how you were as a kid, and then hearing, how you are today, like, I would have never thought, like, if I looked at you or heard you talk right now, I never would have thought that back then. So I think that's just, talk about transformation. Like, that's such a cool transformation. So good for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I actually use that. I would sometimes, in my anatomy class, I would give um, backstories to some of the, but really prevalent females in science, Marie Curie, for example, and give their backstories, and talk about how it was tough for them as females in the field, and they were really underrepresented, and in some cases plagiarized, and in some cases told that they were not going to be good at whatever they were going to try and pursue. And when we're talking about 1800s, early 1900s, like women didn't go on to have advanced degrees. And then I would kind of bring my story up, like not that it was about me, but saying that this female scientist was raised in a single parent household for X many years and was told this narrative, and went on to do X, Y, and Z. And the students, like most of them didn't know who any of them were, but at the very end they were really puzzled. And then I would say, oh, that's me, and they were really surprised and shocked. But I think the people look at people who have advanced degrees in the field and who are really successful and perhaps think that it might have been easy for them. And I have even, received some teaching evaluations that really made me sad, because, I always try to do my best with teaching, but sometimes I didn't reach a student, and they would say like, oh, she's really privileged. She's never had it hard. Like this stuff comes so easily to her. And I was like, oh man, I should have been there when I was in high school. And I was like crying over my math homework because I thought I was going to fail, but yeah, a lot of people don't see that backstory and like how you have to, work through and process and grind to get to wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but the beautiful thing about it is that's the journey, right? Like that's life, like that's the process. And I think, it's all perspective, right? Because I mean, ultimately, like we do actually live here in America, most people that are listening to this podcast, at least. And it's like, like we have the ability, like once we create the awareness for ourselves, like we have the ability to take action on whatever it is that we want to take action on. So, but I'm like fired up right now, like in terms of being inspired, because I love, one thing I talk to my wife about all the time, and like, if we end up having a baby girl eventually as well, it's just like, I want that so much for both of them, like I see it in so many female clients that I work with. It's just this idea of like just empowerment, if you will, because like my mom, like I love her to death, but that's always been one thing that like, I wish I could instill more into her. And so I think me being able to help other, women do that has been something that's been really powerful in my own life. So I love it. I think your story is so powerful. So that's awesome. All right, let's get into this gut health stuff.
Yes.
Probably talk about your story all day here, but okay. So when we talk about like, this quote unquote expert, for example, we talk about like a lot of these like claims that we're seeing, like just for the listeners out there, I mean, what are some things to like look out for? Like, what are some, maybe like some concerns? What are some things that you're hearing from these gurus, these experts, whatever, that maybe aren't necessarily 100% science-based or factual?
Yeah. I actually I was thinking about this earlier today because one of my like Instagram buddies, he had asked me about another gut health person and what I thought. And I, they tend to extrapolate quite a lot, and things are not necessarily false, but they are provided without important context. And they support the idea of some things that physiologically really don't exist. Like there's not really evidence for them. And they sell products. And I thought, what's the difference between the gut health people, like the ones that I really respect and that I think are adding great things to the field, versus those that I'm like, oh man, I wish you would just stop. And so what I posted was that one of the biggest differences I see between sort of gurus and true, experts in the field is the application of context. In that gurus will not apply context because it will dilute their message. But experts always apply context because it refines their message. So, if you're looking at a who is claiming black and white thing, having some absolutist thinking, or really making extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence, and there's really not extraordinary evidence about gut stuff yet because it's so new. So we don't have, there are very few items about which we have really strong meta-analyses and systematic reviews in the literature because it's still emerging. So, when you're looking at things like that, what are the claims that they're making? Are they trying to do something? And it could be, I've talked about this before too, that people will tend to try and get you to, buy a problem, tell you the solution. So saying that, everything, they're linking absolutely everything to gut health and to dysbiosis, to yeast overgrowth, to, what they just say, well, like dysbiosis health. And so while we can't discount the importance and the impact of gut microbiota on human health, we also have to apply the important context and sort of the limitations to the studies that people are using to make these claims. So I think some of one of the most kind of glaring issues would be the idea that there is one type of, one profile of healthy gut versus of dysbiosis, because each of those bacterial species, every taxa, every group of bacteria, they really do play an important role in that ecosystem. It really is an ecosystem. And just like we can't take, the ecosystem of the planet and say we're going to eradicate one whole and it's going to solve all of our problems, we can't do that with the microbiota either. We have co-evolved with and it's not just bacteria. It's also the yeast in there. It's also the archaea, and even viruses and bacteriophages. They all are interacting with one another. And so, yes, we do know that there is a phenomenon of dysbiosis in terms of changes in relative of these taxa that is associated with disease states. But we can't pick specific taxa and say it's this one that's causing this problem. Even though there may be a very strong correlation between a specific taxa and a disease state, we can't say that it's that specific because it may be that is influencing another one and that secondary one is actually what's causing the issue. And so it's just a much more ecosystem that I think we give it credit for. The other idea is, if we do dysbiosis, now I have a protocol to help heal your gut. Well, since we don't have a specific profile for what indicates dysbiosis, we don't have a specific profile for what indicates healthy either. Our healthy references, our healthy human references, don't have disease state, and we assume that the ecosystem within that human is representative of the ecosystem of a human. Based on what we can look at with longitudinal studies, we're looking at changes over time, or where we're comparing people geographical locations, we can say that, probably about a third of our gut microbiota are similar across humans, across species. And we see that other species, every animal inhabited by a ecosystem, but ours is going to look very different from even a rodent, which is what we've done for our studies, biota, or fruit flies, or zebrafish. So I think even in the context of what was the model that we used to determine, we have to apply that as well when we're trying to then make the claim about what might happen in humans. So I think the two biggest things is that you're trying to say, you have this problem of dysbiosis and I'm going to heal your gut. We can't define dysbiosis clearly, and we can't define healing a gut very clearly either. So that gives rise to a lot of things like deep cleanses, protocols for eliminating yeast. Now, while we can have overgrowth of specific strains of yeast in the oral cavity, that's thrush, the vaginal cavity, we see that with yeast. And they can form biofilms around medical devices. For example, if we have a catheter or an implant, that can occur. But we eradicate yeasts from the gut, play a really important role in maintaining, normal functions as far as we can call them normal, educating the immune system, and they even that's one example of, there are very few consistent probiotic strains, but one of the most probiotic strains is actually a yeast, Saccharomyces. So once again, make these black and white statements like, oh, you have a yeast overgrowth and we have to cleanse you. No, there's no evidence to support that either. I mean, the list is so long right now. So much that I think we know, but we don't actually know. And it's for people to capitalize. I mean, I've seen the claim that 90% of your serotonin is made in the gut. And so if you have dysbiosis, then you don't have enough serotonin your mood. Well, in fact, the serotonin, the gut-derived serotonin, doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. Now, having issues with serotonin production in the gut has been implicated in irritable bowel syndrome because it plays a responsibility. So certainly that could be a problem, but the problem is not going to be affecting the brain-derived levels of serotonin. So I think, just those things where it's logical, but you have to kind of get down to the gritty and get into the reeds of the research to really understand what's going on. Something that I really love to do, and I'm so fortunate that I can spend a lot of time doing that. And I just would caution other people to look at what type of claims people are making and why. One thing I try not to do is like promote a specific product. When people ask me for like, oh, probiotics, things like that, really don't back any specific product, specific brands. Like my whole goal is just to get information out there and also help to filter it and vet it. So that people can kind of figure out, what really is the landscape.
Yeah. Wow. Well, talk about mind blown right now. I think that one thing that I see so much, and this is one thing that I talk to some of the other RDs on our staff as well about, is just that, with the information out there and with the ability, for basically anyone and everybody to look at studies and things like that, what do you feel like is the biggest issue with that in terms of people essentially, looking at this research, maybe just looking at the abstract and then creating an Instagram post and, so, we know that's happening a lot, and we know that people are putting out more and more and more of that information. So, maybe for somebody that's listening that is a coach that maybe is doing that, and maybe they're not necessarily knowing that they're doing it, what would be your advice in terms of looking at that study and maybe understanding it better?
Yeah. I think, one of the things that I struggled with even when I was starting out was thinking that people expect me to know everything about everything. And so I have to look like I have every tool in my toolbox and I can address every possible, and, I can be an expert in gut health and in strength sports and in endurance and just absolutely everything. And I think that, you can, like a jack of all trades and master of none. And so people really, they want to do that. They want to be relevant in what's hot in the field right now. And gut health is really, super hot. Everyone's about it. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with sort of looking at your true expertise in your niche and paring down really to that and being really awesome at that thing. And it's okay if you don't 100% know the other stuff. And it takes a lot of humility to just say, I don't really know stuff that well, So I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, there are certain topics that I'm not an expert in that. And so people can ask me and I will gladly tell them, these are mine. I'm not an expert in that. So, take it for what it's worth. So it's really important, I think, to just represent yourself with transparency that, hey, I read this, really cool, but, I don't really know methods. Because guess what? The method for studying the gut microbiome is really, really complex. The graphs are really ugly. I had, this is something that I did my doctoral research in, and I still didn't know everything about it. I still had to go back and teach myself, very that I wasn't familiar with. And the methods really can make such a difference in how we can interpret people's findings. Because I have seen people in the research make the claim that, oh, this increased, a specific metric of diversity or, had some effect. And when I go back and look at the methods, well, no, you didn't actually measure that, you know, or the way you measured this would predispose you to finding that result. Or, you know, even knowing a little bit about the bacteria. So I've seen practitioners say, oh, you know, people who cleaned with this specific cleaning solution, their kids had an increase in this specific taxa that's associated with obesity. And I'm like, well, that's actually a really, you know, in a lot they've correlated that with like health benefits, and it produces butyrate. And so we would arguably be able to say that that's not really a pathogenic bacteria. And that's where we lose that context, you know? So I think it's important to realize that like, if you can't provide context with the claims that you're making, maybe just be a little bit more conservative with the claims. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, with just being transparent and being conservative and just saying like, this is really interesting. You know, I want to learn more about this, but you know, this is a cool new study that came out. But if everyone is promoting themselves as, you know, equally knowledgeable in the field, I think that's where we can kind of run into confusion, you know. And I don't try to, you know, promote myself as like, oh, I know everything. It's just that I am very about what I say I know and what I understand and what I don't, you know. So if there's something about an article that I don't feel confident in reporting, I'm going to do more homework about it more. And I've gone back to my roots and like courses that I haven't taken in a long time. Grad school was like forever ago now. And so I read textbooks, and that way I can get to the fundamentals and get those like really hardwired, so that if I come across an article that looks really interesting, I can do a better job of vetting it.
Man, that point right there is something that I 100% agree with. And I think, I mean, you know, I don't have my PhD, but I did go to school and get like my bachelor's in nutrition. And so I think that right there, and even though like you can still go and study it by all means without maybe going to school, but I feel like that, like just getting a certification, like for a lot of people, they didn't go through like just like, you know, the foundation. They didn't build that foundation, right? They just got the certification. So I definitely agree. I think that's definitely a missing link for sure.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to dive into, and this is, we were talking before this, obviously, because there's a client that we work with that unfortunately has this, but I want to dive into kind of a little bit more of the specifics in relation to Crohn's disease. So what, like, we can kind of go more surface level with this, but like, what are some of the things that you see with people that have been diagnosed with this? And then maybe what are some like just kind of real world like application that maybe if they're not doing, or maybe they could consider to, I don't know, just help with symptoms a little bit.
Yeah, this is a really good example of me, you know, staying like practicing well conservatively, you know, within my scope, because with, you know, working, we have registered dietitians on staff. I'm working on my RD, but I don't have it yet. And I think it's really important and this is something that I tell any client who comes to me with gastrointestinal issues. There are some things that are not quite as life-threatening. There are, you know, they're life-altering, like people who have really severe IBS, bowel syndrome. That is extremely uncomfortable and really difficult and a challenge, but it's something that I can safely work with if they've already, you know, gone to a GP, ruled out everything else, if that's their diagnosis. But in terms of working with people who have, you know, celiac or ulcerative colitis, in most cases, they're going to be working with one of our RDs because they can legally practice medical nutrition therapy. And that's one of the reasons why I'm pursuing my RD, because I do want to be able to, you know, extend my reach to more people who might have clinical needs. But fortunately, you know, this is something also that, like I said, I'm reading a lot about, I'm studying it. Right now, we actually just finished a whole unit on gastrointestinal diseases. So I can speak to that, the caveat that, you know, this is not something that I work with on my own at this point, just because I am very, very, and yeah, you know, I probably could, you know, go out and do things like I do some independent consulting, but I just like to know I have completely covered all of my bases. But, you know, there are areas where we're looking, seeing some really strong correlations in terms of what's going on with the gut microbiota. And we can say that, yes, there's dysbiosis going on here in either we have an increase in pathogenic bacteria or a decrease in beneficial bacteria. So we have sort of this loss of diversity. And with Crohn's and with ulcerative colitis, we do have ulcerations that occur in the intestine. It's just with ulcerative colitis, it's really just in the colon, whereas with Crohn's, it can happen all along the gastrointestinal tract. And individuals with this disease can have periods of normalcy where, you know, they're not having any symptoms, and then they can also have exacerbations or flare-ups. So during those times, you know, they may not be able to really handle much food, you know, taken in orally. And if it's really serious, they may need to go have nutritional support, you know, in a clinic, you know, through even like parenteral nutrition. But during the times that, you know, they're not having a flare-up, then the emphasis is really placed on getting in a nutrient dense. And even though in healthy populations, you know, we don't really need to worry about like glutamine supplementation, that doesn't seem to be effective for improving gut health at all in a healthy population. And studies with like athletes, those haven't been replicated. But it may actually help individuals who have an inflammatory bowel disease to help build up those enterocytes or those intestinal cells that are so badly damaged to flare up. Glutamine is one of the most important amino acids for those cells. So that's one example where we do see a really a dichotomy in what we would suggest for a healthy person versus a person who has an inflammatory bowel disease. Also, the importance of omega-3 fatty acids may be even greater for them. Overall, you know, just increased nutrient density, and you know, the role of fiber can be very important there as well. Although we do have to be careful about when we're suggesting an increase in fiber, but is one of the, if we could say that there are, you know, there's a lot that we don't really know yet. One thing that's consistently shown is in the research is the benefit of dietary fiber for supporting butyrate producing bacteria. And butyrate is a really important short chain fatty acid that is used as energy for cells. It may also improve insulin sensitivity and play a role in appetite regulation. So it's just, and we see that butyrate producers are really prominent in the people who are physically active as well. So I would say, you know, that would be one of the key things. But again, you know, caveat that these are recommendations, you know, kind of textbook recommendations for medical nutrition therapy, and, you know, what I would start with when working with those people.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I know for him, you know, one thing that was really eye-opening was, one, you know, everything that he was doing from a nutrition lifestyle standpoint needed a change in, let's say that. Mm-hmm. You know, so, you know, this was the guy that was like going and eating breakfast at Sonic every morning and then fast food for lunch, you know, and so just like really exacerbating all the symptoms. And so really I've seen a lot of positive changes just from doing the stuff that, you know, everybody should be doing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing that was interesting for him and kind of eye-opening was the kind of, you know, going through and seeing, you know, okay, well, what are the foods that are like causing me issues? And like for him, what got pointed out, you know, there's this interesting conversation these days with like food sensitivities, food intolerances. Mm-hmm. There's these different companies that do like at-home testing. And so I guess just diving into that conversation, like is doing an elimination diet, is getting like, you know, testing done, is there legitimacy to this? Like, should people be doing this? Like, what are your thoughts on
that? Fortunately, there, the Association for, what is it? International Association for Allergies and Immunology. I can never remember, but it's the profession that, you know, is the voice of immunologists and allergenists. They've actually put out a position stand that IgG food sensitivity tests are not valid. So for anyone, do not spend your $300-400 on those tests. They've been invalidated along with, you know, things like the Dutch hormone tests, or like micronutrient deficiencies from hair and things like that. Unfortunately, these are really popular with like functional medicine. But I've even heard of RDs recommending them. And I think, you know, it probably comes from a good place and just like maybe a lack of awareness. But the IgG antibody is not one that plays a role really in an immune response in an actual allergy. And what I usually will ask a person who's had one of these tests, I'll say, oh gosh, was it a lot of foods that you usually eat? And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's foods that I ate every day, and I had no idea it was an issue. Because the IgG antibody is really a memory antibody. It's just, we have seen this protein before, and we know what it is, and we don't need to mount an immune response to that. IgE is what's implicated in the production of more antibodies and the whole response, mast cells, and things like that. So that's really, if we want to look for an actual allergy, that's the antibody we want to look for. And there are valid tests to look for allergies. Usually the test is the one that's most commonly done. It's not the only way that you can detect, but it's a validated way. Now, in terms of elimination diets, yes, those can help to identify food allergies, but hopefully, once you have an allergic response to a food, like, you're able to identify what it is. You don't need to do it again to make sure. That can definitely be really life-threatening. Don't do that. But food sensitivities, it's not necessarily that you are sensitive to a specific food. It's more commonly that you are sensitive to fiber types found in that food. And so that's why the low FODMAP protocol can be really helpful for people, especially with IBS. Now, of course, there are, if we're talking about celiac disease, that is a legitimate gluten allergy. So yes, a gluten exists. Does gluten sensitivity exist? The jury is really still out on that, because it may not be the gluten. It could actually be other proteases that are found in wheat that are causing an issue. With FODMAPs, it's specific fibers that are fermentable, and so they actually they're not problematic. They're not bad for us. It's just that because they are so readily fermentable, that can lead to a lot of gas production, and that can cause bloating and disruption in the wave-like contractions that need to occur to push foodstuffs through and things like that. It can even have a laxative effect. So when we do an elimination diet, we want to make sure, and it can be low FODMAP, or like Whole30 is another one. Carnivore is sort of it's elimination diet on accident, and none of these things should be done for a long period of time. The idea is that you're eliminating foods that commonly cause gastrointestinal distress for a short time until you feel good, your symptoms have subsided, and then you reintroduce foods so that you can test not just whether you can tolerate them, but how much you can tolerate. And Monash University out of Australia, they have actually put together a really great app, and they have a lot of resources on following the low FODMAP elimination and then reintroduction protocol. It's one that I have helped quite a few clients with, and really the transformation in their bloating and their symptoms and just, quality of life is really, really wonderful to see that it's so helpful. So I think it's really important that, when we're to help people, we don't imbue in them a sense of sort of like helplessness that, oh, my hormones are off, or my gut health is broken in some way, and this is why I can't lose weight. It's it's probably just that you're eating a bit too much of these, or not even just, but mono and disaccharides like lactose is one that a lot of people can't digest. So hey, we remove the lactose from your diet, you feel way better. We test some back in, find out that you can only tolerate like a half a cup of milk. Okay, now you can have less than half a cup of milk and you're fine. Broke in there. And the idea is always to move towards as much variety as we can maintain in our diet.
I love that. I'm glad that we created clarity there, because I know that's it's still up in the air with a lot of people, I feel like. So and what's sad about it too is that because admittedly, like, before I knew what I knew now, like, I did that too, and like what it does is it basically just it scares you, one, and two, it like makes you end up like under eating in a lot of cases.
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because if we're over here, if everything comes back red flagged for foods that you're consuming all the time, you cut those foods out, you feel like you can't eat anything. And then now you just cut calories way down and you wonder why you're feeling like crap. It's like, so yeah, that's great. Thanks for the clarity on that one.
Yeah, no problem. I promote because I don't like to see people being, taken advantage of and spending so much money on these tests. I mean, a lot of them are not covered by insurance. These are out of pocket costs. And then people come back, thinking that they're broken. So one website I would recommend is Blackwatch. There are lists of a bunch of different tests. You can go on there and look at the explanation of what people might say for how they're supposed to work, and then explanations for why they're actually not valid. It is a little bit technical, so it might not be every key, but it's one that I like to look into. If there's a test that someone brings to me that I am not familiar with, I'll go check on it there. And then looking at PubMed and just trying to find out what is the logical kind of basis, the theory behind this test. Does that even make sense as a first step? If not, then you probably are going to find that it's not a validated test.
Got it. That's great. Oh, that's an awesome resource. I'm going to definitely go check that out. And for everybody listening, y'all do the same. Gabrielle, I could probably sit here and talk to you all day long and ask you a million questions. There's obviously, gut health. This topic is, we could spend, if y'all try to do a seminar on it, I'm sure y'all could do a 48-hour seminar on it. So,
my God.
or longer, right?
Yeah.
But I want to respect your time. I know you're a busy girl. So where can everybody find you at? Social media, website, podcasts you've done, anything you want to share there? And then,
So I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Vitamin PhD. My website is vitaminphdnutrition.com, and you can go there to see all the podcasts that I've been on. I post those up just as soon as they're published. I have tips to upcoming seminars and also discount codes for sites where I have put up or will be putting up content. So RP Plus, you can get a discount on that. I've got probably 4.5 hours of lecture up there. Stronger Experts, I'm going to be putting content up with them as well. And they have both sites are excellent resources. Just groups of people in the field who are just really amazing researchers, putting up content there. I will be in Finland in just a few days to do a seminar there. If we've got people listening from Helsinki, I will be in New York the weekend of April 6th with Stronger Experts, talking about gut health and sport nutrition there. And then, stuff coming up in May, in London with Revive Stronger, June, UEBC, and a few other places. I'll be in Australia. September, I'll be up there with you guys, with Landon, and maybe a couple more, even maybe before and after that. So hopefully I'll be able to see, the whole world pretty soon. And I love when people reach Instagram and send messages and things like that. I do make time to go on social media regularly so I can connect with people. It's kind of like on my to-do list, several times a week. And so reach out. I love to hear from people.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm sure the listeners will probably want to get you on it again at some point. So thanks so much again.
Oh, thank you.